It's Gary Brown with TUG. I want to thank you for attending the modifications and conversions webinar as a part of our WebUI and Cloud Suite upgrade series. The presentation today is going to be done by Chris Weaver from Infor and also Carol Shinya from NSA Computer Exchange. And Chris, we're all set for your presentation, so please take it away.
All right, great. Thanks, Gary. As Gary mentioned, I'm Chris Weaver at Infor. Going to go through and demystify modifications, third-party products, extensibility, conversion tools in the cloud and versus on-prem WebUI. I'm just going to quickly go through the slide deck that we have, and then I have another slide deck, and we'll jump into actual applications here as well. When we talk about Cloud Suite distributions and mods, there's some questions that come in. What's the real scoop on mods? What about functional gaps? Exactly what does extensibility mean? And then ultimately, who does them, Infor or us? So extensibility is I like to call it a play-on word. You're still modifying the application, though you're doing it in another way. It is being done in a sense that you are able to update from version to version without impact, whereas a traditional mod is more invasive, if you will, and requires a lot more rigor and discipline to verify that the versions can be updated. Extensibility in the cloud is a little different than extensibility on-prem. What we have a functional gap in that you are not able to extend, aka modify, business logic known as progress code in Cloud Suite distribution. However, we can get around a lot of that using extensibility in WebUI. Now, if you want to change pricing logic in Cloud Suite distribution, that's going to be in core business logic, not something that you're going to be able to do like you could on-prem with progress user hooks and using SX Architect. However, in the cloud, if you want to make changes to the user interface or alter the way the user interface captures data, displays data, and submits data, that is fully within the realms of what we can do with Cloud Suite. We do use the same framework user interface builder on-prem as we do cloud, and all of the extensibility data is stored as metadata, meaning it's stored in the database. So when we go through our updates each month in Cloud Suite distribution, or you do on-prem, your extensions uplift automatically between those versions. Now, obviously, we want you to do testing to make sure everything is good and such, but the way that we have the extensions integrated, there is less opportunity to cause code conflict. Who does them, Infor or us? Well, that depends upon your capabilities. If you have the ability to write or develop in JavaScript, you can very much do extensions in Cloud Suite distribution or in WebUI on-prem. If you don't have those capabilities or you want Infor to do them for you, we have a services group that can very well create those extensions as well. Treat them just like we have in the past with the traditional modifications process. But again, from the UI perspective in Cloud Suite distribution, we do them as extensions. And I'll walk through what that actually means. So I'm going to jump over to another slide deck that I have and talk about extensibility, since it is a very large topic and there's a lot of tools that actually can solve extensibility. And really it's about the right tool for the right job. So I look at extensibility as three different components. Extensibility through the tech stack, using context applications, formerly known as web parts, and then the CSD SX WebUI core. When we talk about extensibility in the tech stack, we're talking about extending the home pages, creating new home page widgets. These are all written in JavaScript and can be pinned into the home pages, and they can be created to interact with the ION APIs or backend API services.
Hey, Chris,
Mongoose. Yes.
This is Gary. Do you mind going to a full slideshow? Because right now all of your screens are shown on the left.
Absolutely. There we go. Sorry about that, Gary. So then we also have Mongoose. Mongoose is well, it's a full development framework. It can create forms for you simply by dragging and dropping. I hate the term WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get, but that's really what we're talking about. It's all web-based. You develop and design the forms, and then you can directly bind to the back-end Mongoose database to store data, retrieve data. Should you want to communicate from Mongoose to Cloud Suite distribution, you would use the Ion API connector to allow Mongoose to communicate directly to Cloud Suite. We would use that same mechanism for third-party integrations. If we have a third-party app where we need to retrieve or present information into Cloud Suite distribution, using REST-based web services, we go through the Ion API and communicate directly with Cloud Suite distribution. We do not have the capabilities of doing ODBC connections like we might have on-prem. We must use REST-based web services to do that communication. Currently, we have about 200 API endpoints for Cloud Suite distribution, and we have more to come. We're continuously adding based upon enhancement requests, and then also internal discussions about more feature functionality to add for Ion API connectivity. Recently, we've added a fetchware that will allow you to do a somewhat like an ODBC connection, where you can form a sentence as a where clause through the Ion API and retrieve all records. It would be like a select statement with ODBC. And again, the Ion APIs are available through homepage widgets, through Mongoose, and any third-party integration products that are able to talk REST-based web services. So what are home pages? I call them micro apps. They are independent applications. They can be run from the same server. For instance, Mongoose can create homepage widgets, or you can use the software development toolkit that's specifically designed for homepage widgets. And each one of them acts as their own little application. We do have a catalog of pre-built applications. But we also do offer the software development toolkit for those that know and want to learn about how to write Angular and JavaScript. Banner widgets are, again, a micro application. Let me see if I do have a screenshot of that. So a banner widget sits on top of your home page, and it does a lot of graphing, is its primary purpose. So here I have the top five customers over the last 6 months, and it gives me a nice graph. All of this is Soho enabled. You don't have to know how to write the HTML. You add the components for the widget, and it draws the charts for you. And down below, I have just pre-populated some homepage widgets that came packaged with the stack. So shifting gears a little bit into Ion. Many of you have heard about Ion for years, and there was a question raised, what's the difference between Ion and Mongoose? And in some ways they have similar capabilities. They both have a workflow engine. They both can communicate with the Ion API, and they can update or retrieve information from Cloud Suite distribution. The big difference is Ion is a background engine. There's no forms creator tool to generate a new web page or to be able to create form fields to present information. If I wanted to create my own CRM, for example, I could not do that in Ion, but I could, with Mongoose, create a customer repository rather easily using the forms creator tool, and again the built-in database on the back end that Mongoose provides. So really where Ion comes in is communicating from two applications, and that could be SX.enterprise or Cloud Suite distribution and a third-party app. That would be done using a document exchange, or what we call our BODs. Cloud Suite distribution would send out BODs to a listener application be it again a CRM or any type of third party that can consume these documents, and they would be XML. And vice versa, that third-party application can send documents back into Cloud Suite and further processing take place. If you want to create purchase orders or create sales orders from an external third party, you don't directly have to call the ION API. You can let ION do that work for you simply by sending a sales order BOD or a purchase order BOD. So one of the areas where ION really shines is creating workflows. And one of the new features added recently to Cloud Suite distribution that on-prem had for quite some time was the ability to make API calls. And now we don't have to go about with the older versions of ION, we were SOAP based, and it was kind of clunky, and there was a lot of effort that had to be put into to create those, what they called exit points. You really had to be familiar with SOAP to be able to do such. We've converted that over now to an ION API call, and this is all REST-based. So by simply declaring what the post operation is, and all of this is retrieved from ION API, which I'll show here shortly, we can provide input parameters and output parameters, and in the most simple terms, add without any development effort an API call through a workflow. So for this example, we have an API call that reaches out and checks an AR balance for a customer as a sales order comes in. If they exceed the threshold that's determined in this decision, it will then submit as a task for an executive approval. If it is approved by the executive, we send a notification actually I misspelled that. I apologize. This is supposed to submit, not cancel. If it's approved, it will submit or take that order off of hold and send a notification and then complete itself. If it is not approved by the executive, it'll actually go in and cancel the order altogether, so it removes it from the from an ordered state, and again send a notification. If it does not meet those conditions that have been set in play, it gets routed to the credit department for approval. So this would be an instance where we have set that their AR balances are over 120 days. We do not want to have any more orders granted for that customer unless there's executive approval. And again, we're interacting with the APIs directly. We're not having to rely on a human other than decide yes or no, do I approve or not, rely on a human to go into Cloud Suite distribution or really WebUI on-prem and take action on that order. Do I cancel it or do I release it for further processing? And I'm actually going to jump into, instead of sitting on more screenshots, I'm going to jump into Cloud Suite distribution and give just a really quick tour, since I've talked a lot about the ION API, really what the ION API is. We have several APIs that are available. Really the one I was going to talk through was the SX API. However, we do have other API endpoints, Infor Document Management, we have Infor ION, Infor Mingle, and all of these would be available on the on-prem also. So what I'm talking through here, there's not going to be a difference between on-prem or Cloud Suite distribution. If I drill into SX and I go into the details, I can see documentation that will show me all of the different endpoints, and this does take a moment to load. There's quite a few endpoints available out there. And if you're familiar with the real-time API, either the Java version or the .NET version, these endpoints should look familiar to you. SX.AR customer maintenance, for example, or vendor maintenance. The difference here is, instead of having to read a text document, a Word document or PDF, I can actually drill down into these, and if my computer will cooperate, there we go. It gives me examples, so I know exactly how to form my query and what data I'm going to get back. And here again, what error codes or what success codes I'm going to get, and the type of data that it's going to return. Now, had I picked a little bit more simple one, we also have if I can find it, we have a try it out button. So when I click try it out, it'll actually submit this request against the ION API for my tenant. So if I'm logged into Cloud Suite distribution, this would submit against my actual data, and then it would return back data. This is critical for a developer to understand how to use the APIs. Without this, they would have to have a more in-depth knowledge, or again, I refer back to that Word document that we've had in the past, to be able to interpret how to make these calls. By having this information on the request and the response and the ability to try it out, they don't really have to understand the business logic behind the scenes. That's up to somebody else at that point. They can be, worked through as a development team to understand what data I'm sending in. Business analysts can give me that information, and then I can parse and deal with the response data. And again, we have a little over 200 of these available, and we are continuing to add as enhancement requests come in, and then also as we identify internally, such as that fetchware that we've added. Just real briefly, you also have the ability for Mingle. So if you want to do some types of interaction with Mingle, we have the documentation and the API calls available there. This would allow a third-party integration to interact with the Mingle framework itself. So if we wanted to publish a feed, such as like an RSS feed, we could publish that information. We can also interact with tasks. So if you have a task that you want to actually have a vendor acknowledge or approve or decline, you can have them interact with that task. They do have to be set up as a user for many of these, but it does allow them to interact with these items if they're assigned to that particular task. They don't have to necessarily log into the framework and click the approve button. They can, from an automated perspective or code perspective, interact with ION as well. And again, same thing with SX.enterprise or any of these. You also have the ability to add external third-party APIs. So if you're working with a third party that has a REST-based API framework or set of APIs, you can add them as part of the suite. We would add it as a custom. We would give it a name, suite name, and we give it a context and context with endpoints. So that allows their API to be consumed by the ION framework, and you could tie in through ION workflows, as we showed earlier, for the ION API calls. You can tie third-party calls into there as well. So, for example, if I tied the United States Postal Service API into ION API, one of my bods could be a sales order bod, and I wanted to validate the shipping address. I could go through a workflow and have that address validated through an API call with externally reaching out to USPS, and then if it matches, have the workflow go forward. If it doesn't match, send a notification to the person responsible for updating either the bill to or the ship to addresses. So there's a lot of power and functionality here. That's what separates, in my mind, that's what separates us out from Mongoose. Now, I don't have a good Mongoose example, but I do encourage you to go out to mongoose.infor.com and read about what Mongoose has to offer. Very briefly, here's the high-end, the high-level points. It does have an independent workflow engine, but you have the ability to control users and security. It's all browser-based development. And again, it does integrate to Infor ION API, the full stack suite. If you want to create graphical web-based front ends, that's where Mongoose is going to shine for you. It reduces I don't want to say eliminates, but it reduces the amount of knowledge and development effort or development skill set to create web-based applications. In the simplest sense, you can drag and drop fields, and through a 2-day, I think it is, self-guided tour, you can create a very simple but effective CRM tool where you could add fields to put in a user, first name, last name, email address, and such, and have that commit to a database without writing any code. I'm going to jump back to my PowerPoint here just to keep myself. Let's see. Okay. I want to make sure I keep myself on topic here. So we also talked about context applications, formerly known as web parts. Again, they're microservice applications. They're web-based. If you want to create your own, this is a huge opportunity for Mongoose again. Since it is a web-based front end, Mongoose is, and the context applications are expecting it to be a web-based application, it's a perfect opportunity for Mongoose. We use a very simple methodology to communicate between context applications and SX, and services can help you navigate the waters with that. There's also some documentation out on Info-Extreme on how the messaging works for those developers that want to jump in feet first. You can, through the administration area of the stack, create your own context applications and bind them to an application. It's just kind of a real high level here. So I want to go through, and I apologize, I jump around a little bit. Okay, I'm getting myself, here we go. I'm getting myself a little lost. Okay, so I want to go through Cloud Suite distribution and WebUI functionality for extensibility. We have what I would consider two levels of extensibility. I call personalization extensibility because it builds on the same framework that we built with extensibility in mind. Though personalization is restricted. It does allow you to personalize at the user profile and company levels, and security enforces what who can and can't personalize. The big thing to note is it's enabled across the entire application. Every module, tab, view can be personalized, and that's something that we've never had before. What personalization allows you to do is move fields to preferred order, show hide fields, resize fields, and change labels. Now, that seems a little restrictive, but that does really solve a lot of the feature functionality needed to personalize screens. So here's an example from the personalization where you can move, I selected move forward, it would take the exchange rate and throw it over top of the standard pack. Again, it's a WYSIWYG editor. I don't like the term, but it truly is what you see is what you get. As this screen is laid out, when I drag things around, whatever it looks like here, when I go into run mode, it will look exactly like that. Extensibility builds on top of what personalization can do. You don't have to have any development knowledge to personalize. To a degree, you don't have to have development knowledge to extend unless I need to change or alter the JavaScript or the code that interacts with the user interface. So what I mean by that is from a non-developer's perspective, I can add and edit widgets. Widgets are buttons, containers, fields. I can move or modify the layout of the screens and create a more advanced personalization. This allows me to do things that normally personalization would not allow me to do. And to give an example of that, let me jump in again to WebUI, or Cloud Suite distribution rather. And I'm going to pick on ARSC. And let's just retrieve a customer. So when I go to extensibility, I have the ability to edit many more options than what personalization gives me. If I don't like the way this search function works, I can change that. If I want to change the tab order of the fields across the top, I can change that. I want to modify or extend the customer screen though, so I'm going to select the IRSC Detail General. And with extensibility, it lets me develop at a company level and a system level. If I do it at system, it applies to all my companies that exist within my tenant. If I do it at company level, it's only going to apply to that company that I'm currently logged into. This gives us a little bit of an advantage here. So if I have multiple companies that I operate out of, and one company has slightly different requirements than the other companies for the user interface, I can extend at just that company level. And then all other companies would not have any knowledge of the extensions that were created. So I'm just going to jump into system level. And each of these areas where I have the label customer and contact and such, those are what we call containers. And in personalization, I'm not allowed to drag fields from one container to the next. This is to protect us if there's any security applied at the container level. Now in extensibility, I can really do whatever I want. So you do have to be mindful, if I can actually do it correctly, you do have to be mindful that by moving things around, you potentially could be changing or altering the way the application is going to function. I would never recommend doing any type of extensibility in your production version. Do it in a test version or have a test company set up that you can work with extensibility. And then when you're satisfied, you can copy that into your production tenant data or production company data. So some things that extensibility allows me to do above and beyond is the above and beyond personalization is I can actually change the type of box or the widget that data is being displayed in. So if name, I don't want to put name in a text box, I want to put it in a text area, I can change to text area. Again, should I have chosen radio set, now I've just broken functionality of the input name field. So I do have to be mindful of what I'm doing. But notice I'm not making any I'm not writing any code. Should I change the data model, this for the more technical, this is how we bind data back to the database or those API calls. I can change this, but again, it would alter the functionality here. One of the biggest requests that we have is I want to be able to add a user field to this screen. So if I go to text box, I add a new text box and I change, oops, I'm going to change that to my custom field, and I want to bind that to user 1. Now I just know that is available in the payload, but again, now that here's where we kind of cross that threshold. I have to know a little bit about development here, from this screen now I can add user fields. Should I want to be able to display information from another table in customer, let's say I want to show or an aggregation of the last 10 orders added up, I can actually take this and here's where I can really write code. I can have on a change event or based upon when the data, I'm sorry, I need to go back to here, the data model, I could also do something like this and say my custom, if I can type, function. And by writing some JavaScript, I can have the data or the result returned back from my custom function populate that field. So that's where we do cross that threshold, is now I have to understand how to write JavaScript and to be able to do things like that. But for the most simplest terms, to move fields around, to change field sizes, or to do simple things like make a field show a user field on a specific screen, I don't really have to have any development effort or knowledge to be able to do that. Once I save my changes, and I will go ahead and save my change here, I can go to a menu function, extension administration, that allows me to see any extensions that I've created. So in this case, I actually have three extensions. They're all active. So in this particular one, I just did a screen level. It's an extended view. There's no JavaScript, but I can drill down in and I can see if I want to see what the actual data looks like, I have the ability to do that. I have minor revision control. So if I were to go in and I were to make another change and save, it would prompt me and ask me if I wanted to create a revision. This isn't full-on revision control. It's just a way for you to be able to save your work over time. So if you make a mistake, you can fall back to a prior version. So again, not something that you want to use and trust on for full revision control, but it has some basic functionality built in. And we do have the ability to inactivate, so I can uncheck that. And I actually did create a new version, so it bumped the revision up to 2, but it's inactivated. To inherit or take in any active extensions simply by logging out and logging back in of the application will load those extensions. So now we kind of covered what we can do from the user's perspective or the UI perspective for extensibility. What can we do? Where's our difference here between CSD and on-prem? I mentioned earlier that we can do all the same things that we've talked about so far from the UI perspective, both in CSD and on-prem. What I'm not able to do on-prem or in the cloud is with the business logic, and this is what we're historically known to work with SX.architect. This is creating user hooks, creating any type of change or altered progress functionality. That is only available on-prem, and again, SX.architect is separately licensed. That holds true for both U and Infor. So if you want to have an extension done that requires progress work in Cloud Suite distribution, it is not something that we have available. It is only on-prem. That also does hold true for, there was a few questions about Q&Ds. Q&Ds by and large are only an on-prem functionality. There is no progress editor in the cloud. You only have access to a web-based interface. Now, that doesn't mean that going through some of the conversion utilities you can do some of that work, but you don't have the ability to do whatever kind of Q&D you want to write and perform the maintenance that you were looking to do that you're able to do on-prem. So again, Q&Ds are an on-prem only feature as well. And with that, I will hand it back over. Well, actually, just Gary, is there any questions that came in?
Yeah, we do have a few, so let's try to cover them as quickly as possible. So one question. Today we process EDI 850s through OE batch, auto source line to drop ship, process batch update, and both OE and DO POs are created. Is this possible without custom web parts and API calls, etc.?
Can we take that one off? Yeah, and I will answer it. I'll get an answer for it, but that's a little bit above my my knowledge.
Okay, very good. I appreciate that. And we're capturing all these questions, Chris, so it'll be easy enough to follow up with any of that you didn't answer. Another one, can we use version 11X on premises with max recall with WebUI as we do now with version 6.1.08?
Yes, absolutely. On-prem Max Recall has the same type of integration. If you have if you're doing GUI with Max Recall, there's functionality to be able to punch out to Max Recall. It works a little different. It uses a context web part, but it is available and functional. You still have the ability to do the doc exchange and such and get those into Max Recall also. Okay.
Great, thank you. Is there a list of what the 200 plus API endpoints are?
I believe we have those documented. If you have access to, well, I guess obviously you need to have access to Cloud Suite distribution to be able to take a look and see. I can put together a doc though, Gary, and I'll send that out through you of the currently available API calls.
Okay, very good. With Mongoose, can we create and deploy a simple customer order entry screen complete with data validation? Example, RX optical entry where the last 4 of the credit card is entered and validated along with simple first and last name and email address. That data is then sent through an ION workflow. Is it possible?
Yes, that is possible. That ION workflow, I'm presuming, would then create a sales order in SX.enterprise. Is that the was that the intent?
I'm pretty sure that was, but Don, if you want to extend on that question, let me know. So, okay, another question. I understand there are considerable differences between different versions of Angular. What version does Infor use?
Currently, we use 1X. I think it's 1.5 for Angular. The the widgets, the homepage widgets, they use TypeScript, so that's a little bit different. There's a Node.js backend server, which is what runs TypeScript there as well. But as far as Cloud Suite distribution, SX proper, we use 1X, and will so for an extended period of time. We have not considered at this point migrating up to a newer version.
Okay. All right. So Judy asked a question. I'm not sure I understand the context of it, but she said, "Can you use this to set a default value in a field?" And
Extensibility, yeah. So let me just pull up web here really quick. Yeah, you can absolutely set a default value here. If I were go back to the developer tool for a second, I go to the lookup name. I can absolutely do that, and it can be any type of most types. It cannot be for a lookup. That uses back-end search engine calls. But I can set a default value here. I do have to have a little bit of JavaScript to be able to do it. But let's say I just have custom field. I create the binding there, and then in my developer extension, I won't get too technical into it. But if I have a let me just select this because we're just so short on time. If I come down here and I show my JavaScript, what I would do here is I would say, oops, don't hit tab, dtl.rsc.my or custom field, I think I called it, equals Chris. And by doing that, then when this controller loads, again, this is Angular. I put that in the wrong spot for those that are keeping score. When this controller loads, it would bind that my name to custom field, which would then populate the lookup name here. So it would be defaulted in. And you can actually not just do this, but this could actually be a function that does some logic, logic here to determine what the data displaying in that custom field should be. So if this, else if this, that kind of thing. So you have the ability to do that kind of data binding as well.
okay. So there's a couple more questions, but I do want to get to Carol's presentation as well. So we'll do it for 2 more minutes, and then at 2:45, I'm going to cut over to Carol and let her do it, and then we'll cut back to the Q&A when she's finished her presentation. Is there documentation available on which fields are contained in which data models?
In SX Architect, there is probably the best repository of information. That means that you have to have SX Architect. As a rule, let me go to customer setup here to best demonstrate this. Even our developers do this many times. We pull up the developer toolkit, we make a request for data, and I then analyze the call that it has made, and I can see the payload. So I want to know what data is created and available on this screen using the developer tools. I can see exactly what it is, and I like this solution, believe it or not, because it gives me some context. I actually know exactly what the payload is, and I know that this one's a string. It's got quotes around it, so it's very easy to figure out, what field I'm going after, because hey, I'm looking at it right on my screen. There's the phone number. Oh, that's the phone number. So again, we use the dev tools a lot for that.
Okay, thank you, Chris.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 2:45. Carol, I'm gonna make you the presenter and ask you to get through your part, and then we will come back to the rest of the questions that have been asked. Some of them are going to be for you, Chris, and we will do everything we can to finish up by top of the hour. So, Carol, I made you the presenter. You should be able to share your screen.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you, Chris. Hi, everyone. My name is Carol Shinney. I'm Director of Global Accounts. My co-host, or my co-conspirator, as I call him, is Jason Kahn, our VP of Software Development. We are both with NSA Computer Exchange. We are an alliance partner of Inforce. Just to give you a little bit of background, some of my history. I started supporting and implementing SX back in '95 in the character days. I was working at the time with Groupe Laurier, which was a Canadian reseller for NextTrend, who was then acquired by Inforce. So I joined the Inforce team for a couple of years, and I worked in their ICS team. After that, I decided to jump over the fence and work with a customer who was implementing SX.e WebUI 10.3. And then I recently joined NSA this year. I'm currently working with 4 different WebUI accounts in varying stages, from getting WebUI installed right up to a live customer. Working with 2 more who are now putting together their plan to kick off a WebUI upgrade in early 2018. My co-worker, co-conspirator, cohort in crime, as I call him, Jason Kahn, he's also been supporting and implementing SX since 1993. He worked with a Canadian reseller of NextTrend called Systemetrics, and in '98 he joined NSA. Jason as well is working with our WebUI accounts, and he's currently working with one of our customers to move some of their mods to extensions, which we all know all about now after Chris's great presentation. So today I'll be talking about conversions. So the conversion programs, what we used to know as the DC or data conversion, which used to be a character module, is now part of standard CSD, cloud, as well as on-prem. They're all available as menu options, and when you upgrade to WebUI, they'll just be there. They're included with the standard package. They've included a couple of new utilities for those DC programs. You now have a source file viewer where you can actually take through a menu option in WebUI, just look at the incoming data source file. The 2 other utilities that they've added, including listing special characters in files in your incoming source file, as well as the ability to remove it. I know a few of my Canadian companies out there who might want to use that because we have some French accents we have to deal with. Some of you may have other characters that are hidden in those data source files coming from perhaps old conversions that you did many years ago. So 2 very good utilities that were added. Now that the data conversion programs have been taken over or now part of standard SX CSD, this is now part of the distribution roadmap. It's now part of standard support, and if you'd like new features or functionality add to it, you can simply put in an ERS through Inforce Extreme. In the past, the data conversion programs were an offering from Inforce Services, the ICS team, so any changes or modifications that you needed were considered a modification. So conversions on-prem, like I said, comes with your upgrade to WebUI. Keep in mind the security will likely be off, so you will need to go into Operator Security FASO to turn it on. One of the things that you may need to also be aware of, if you currently are licensed for the conversion program and you have modified them in any way. So you've got an SI to make change to it. That, of course, will need to be uplifted with any WebUI upgrade. Or you can simply drop those mods and go ahead with the new standard program. Keep in mind with any modification, WebUI is now, Infor refers to it as a living software, and that is because they have features and fixes that are added in a patch every month. Any modification, the conventional modifications in the progress code may prevent you from taking those monthly updates regularly, as you'd need to uplift those mods. So you may want to be careful when considering doing any of those modifications, including to the custom, to the data conversion program. Cloud version. There's actually, if you're considering moving to the cloud from your current graphical or character on-prem, there's actually two ways with which you can move your data across to the cloud. So the new programs, the new WebUI contains the data conversion program, so you can use the conventional way to convert your data from your current graphical or character database and move it into the cloud using the DC program. The alternate way with which you can bring your data across, you can ask either your partner or Infor Services to simply take a copy of your existing database and bring it over to the cloud. Well, they upgrade it first and bring it to the cloud because you'd be coming from a lower version. But one thing you need to be aware of, any custom fields you may have added to the database, any custom indexes will be dropped. You'll no longer be able to have a different schema from the standard distribution CSD database schema. I believe Chris also mentioned this as well about finding that documentation for the data conversion program. If you are looking for mapping files or the conversion guide, they're all available on Infor Extreme. From the home screen, simply go to your search, files documentation, SX.enterprise, and there is a folder there for data conversions. And I do believe they go as far back as version 5.5, and they're maintained with every new release. Okay, so moving on to the Q&Ds. Chris did also mention this. On the cloud version of CSD, there is no progress editor available. So the conventional way that you wrote your custom Q&Ds and executed them is no longer available. There may be certainly ways, and I'm sure Jason or Chris, someone with the right technical expertise, can certainly help you by, if you need to somehow make changes to the data using the, you could use the IN APIs to accomplish that. With the on-prem version of WebUI, the progress editor is available. You can do the Q&Ds as you've done in the past with both your graphical and character. One thing we did note with some of our upgrades, the progress editor script, SX.e, or if you're in the character, the older character days, it was trendy, may not be part of the standard upgrade script, but that's easily rectified and can be recreated. Just keep in mind, there aren't big differences or any real differences between your old GUI database and the WebUI one, but some of the newer features available in WebUI are not necessarily stored in the progress database. Some of those things, such as the workflow and alerts that Chris demoed for us, those actually reside in the Mingle database. Gary, I'm pretty much done with this. I'm ready take on any questions if anyone has any questions for us.
I will continue with the questions that were being asked during Chris's presentation, and then once we get through those, if there are any more that come in, we'll get back to yours. Very nice picture of your dog. Chris,
Whoops, sorry about that.
That's okay. Chris, I'm going to change you back to the presenter so that we can see your screen, and then let's continue with the questions. So next one is there documentation available on which fields are contained in which data model? I'm sorry, I asked that question already. Next question. Where does the custom JavaScript function source reside?
So the function source resides, the extensibility function source resides and is accessible through the extension administrator. This is stored in a new progress table that we added, SX Web Mod and SX Web Extension. For on-prem, you have access to those directly. Again, through cloud, you have to use the the tools to be able to get into it. But that's what this is doing. And as a matter of fact, the extended view, the JSON objects that create the extended views, also resides in those same tables. So it's all database based. The base code, the vanilla code, if you will, resides on just a file server. It is still raw files.
Okay. Next question. I don't see extensions as an option, only personalized. Is this a permission thing? And then a footnote. We're on-prem version 11.008.
Yeah. So we introduced extension admin, the admin tool in 11.09. However, the extension menu function was added prior to 8. It's a Sasso function. So if you go into Sasso, and I'm trying to be as quick as I can be here, Gary. I don't know my initials, CW01. Fast as I can, if you go under controls, down towards the bottom, there's a new field, extension level access. Change that to either company or system, and it'll give you that that menu function.
Perfect. Next question. For on-prem development, is an additional license beyond architect required?
No. So little backstory, just because I love telling it. When we set out to write WebUI XI version, we did not want to have all of our developers writing different streams. So we built our own framework. So what you see here is what the SX team created, and we thought it was so cool that we included it as part of the product. So you just get it with what it is. So you're using the exact same tool that the developers are using internally. They don't access it through extensions. We added that for on-prem and cloud, but it's the exact same modeling tool. But no, there's no additional license. It's just included in the product.
Very good. Thank you. Can you easily set fields as mandatory entry?
Yes, actually you can. Let's say I want to make lookup name mandatory. I can go to attributes and make it required. However, I can also, if I wanted it required based on a condition, I also have required conditions, and this evaluates as a Boolean. So if I can spell correctly, it's either true or false. Now, if you had actual JavaScript, you would be .myscript. Again, spelling is not my forte, probably not English either. But as long as this returned true or false, it could also set the required condition. But most simply, just by checking that flag would make it required all the time.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So there's a lot more questions. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. So I'm going to make this the last question. And then as a follow-up, Chris and Carol, I'm going to run the report and ask you guys to produce written answers to all the rest of the questions that we didn't get to deal with. And we will post them to the TUG forum on the WebUI and CSD forum page. So if you're not a member of that group, please go and join that now, and then we'll follow up with these answers. So the last question today, who should we contact to get WebUI extension, API documentation, and training?
Services. So reach out to Ron Stevens in consultant services. He'd be the best place to start.
Stevens, S-T-E-V-E-N-S?
S-T-E-P-H-E-N-S.
Right,
Ron Stevens.
ron.stevens@infor.com.
Correct.
Very good. Okay. We're out of time. We're going to end the webinar, but first, let me just say a big thank you to you, Chris, and to you, Carol, for your presentations. They are greatly appreciated. I can tell by the number of people that are on this webinar. It's a very important and timely topic. Thank you guys for your time today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gary.
Okay. Take care, everyone. All right. Have a great day.